At the entrance to an abandoned Saxon audit, two things were left lying on the ground: a backpack and a bicycle. Their owner, 34-year-old Oliver K., went down under the mountain on the 8th of October, 2024, and never came back up. He didn't get lost in some stranger's cave. Oliver was digging his own passage into an old silver working near Annaberg Buchholz when the rock above him began to move. A week later, two dogs, working independently of each other, marked the same spot inside the collapse zone. And then the authorities named the price of the recovery and ruled the operation disproportionate. Annaberg Buchholz sits in the Ore Mountains of Saxony, almost on the Czech border. On the surface, the low wooded ridges look harmless. The danger is hidden underground. In 1491, Kaspar Nitzel found a vein of silver ore in this area. 5 years later, the town of Annaberg was founded here. The Frohnau district and the Schreckenberg Hill became one of the oldest mining grounds in the whole range. Silver, cobalt, later other ores. The mountain was opened up again every century. After the Second World War, the workings were gone over one more time, this time for uranium. Those were the years when the Frischgluck adit was driven for hauling out rock and ventilating the levels. An adit, put simply, is a horizontal passage into the side of a mountain, not a shaft, but a door into the rock. The work ended, the people left, the passages stayed. Under the forest near Annaberg, there are hundreds of kilometers of galleries, shafts, and abandoned levels from different eras. Some of them on historical plans, some on papers nobody has read in 100 years. In 2019, the mining landscape of the Ore Mountains was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List, with the Annaberg-Frohnau mining area listed as a site of its own. Officially, it's a museum landscape. Part of the workings is fitted out, lit, open to visitors. The rest is closed, not maintained, not ventilated, not inspected. Nobody has counted how many voids are down there, and these are exactly the passages that people regularly enter without authorization, with a torch, a shovel, and a firm belief that something is still lying down there. One of them lived half an hour's drive from Frohnau. His name was Oliver. His surname can't be given. German law protects the data of the deceased and their families, and the press only printed the initial Oliver K., 34 years old, living right there in Annaberg Buchholz. People who knew him called him Oli for short. Not much is known about him. There's no evidence he was a professional miner, a member of a caving club, or part of any mine rescue service. A man with a job, a bicycle, and one very strong passion. Oliver spent his free time underground in those very closed workings. He was looking for valuable minerals. The Annaberg area is well known to collectors, and the veins of the old levels really can hold things people pay money for. The press called him a hobby treasure hunter. In his own circle, it went by another name, Schwarzbefahren. Unauthorized entry into a closed mine, working. Anyone who does it knows two things. It's illegal, and it's dangerous. Oliver knew both. Later, when the story reached the papers, Oliver's father, 69-year-old Detlef K., said words that nearly every German outlet repeated in one form or another. It's an insane hobby. We knew about it and we warned him 100 times. The warnings changed nothing. His parents saw the risk from the outside. Oliver saw it from the inside, and by all appearances considered it manageable. In early October 2024, he packed his tools and drove out to the forest near Frohnau. There are more than a handful of people like him in the Ore Mountains, an established scene with its own language and its own unwritten code. Entering closed workings is against the law and carries a fine, and the mining authorities methodically seal and fill in the entrances with concrete. People find new ones. There are several motives, and greed doesn't cover them. Some go for minerals to sell to collectors. Some go for old miners' tools and rusted ore carts. That, for them, an abandoned level is a kind of museum you can't buy a ticket to. Some go simply out of interest in a place people left long ago. There are also stories in the Ore Mountains about wartime caches. The idea that at the end of the war, valuables were hauled into the old adits, and that all of it is still sitting behind the next rockfall. Not one such cache in the Frohnau area has ever been documented, but the legend still sets the direction of the next unauthorized search. A few minutes from where all this happened, there's a show mine. Inspected supports, ventilation, lighting, communications, a head count at the entrance. A closed working has none of that. Nobody props up the roof, nobody measures the air, nobody pumps out the water. Nobody knows you're inside, and nobody notices that you haven't come out. Signals don't reach through rock. A man who goes into a passage like that alone removes his safety net entirely. All that's left is his own judgment of the risk. By then, the official entrances to the old mining field near Frohnau were closed. So, an entrance was made by hand. Someone had dug a narrow burrow in the slope near the Schreckenberg, through to the historical workings. The mining authority would later describe it in exactly those terms: an illegal, hand-dug entry. Here it's worth flagging an inconsistency that runs through the coverage. Some outlets call the site the Frisch Glück Stollen, others the Kippenheiner Stollen. The reporting is contradictory. Both names belong to the same old mining field by the Schreckenberg, where workings from different centuries are interwoven and in places connect. The press never gave a precise documentary attribution. Something else matters far more. The hand-dug passage led not into a solid gallery, but into the collapse zone of a former shaft. A shaft is a vertical mine opening. Once it's abandoned, it caves in over time, and above it a loose mass of rock debris forms, the single most unstable place in the whole working. The mechanics of a collapse are simple. The supports in the old passages are timber, and timber rots. 100 years of damp turns a support timber into crumbling fiber. Water seeps along the cracks and washes out the fine material, and the roof loosens from the inside. In winter, that same water freezes in the same cracks and splits the stone apart. The rock above an old shaft holds in a balance that took decades to settle. Even a small disturbance to the structure of the fallen material can break it. A man clearing himself a passage in a zone like that is working directly beneath this unstable mass and can't see it. His torch lights the space ahead of him and leaves the ceiling in the dark. The investigation would later identify a collapse triggered by his own work as the cause of the accident. The calendar of this story fits into 2 dates: the last confirmed sign of life from Oliver K. Falls on Sunday, the 6th of October, 2024. What happened after that is known not from witnesses, but from evidence. On Tuesday, the 8th of October, he rode out to the workings near Frohnau, by bicycle, as usual. He went alone, he had no companions that day, and by all accounts, he rarely did. Autumn in the Ora Mountains is a time when there are few people in the forest. Nobody saw him go down, and nobody saw that he didn't come back up. Then comes a detail the German press kept coming back to, because it explains the lost day. His tools stayed at the entrance and lay there untouched for a full 24 hours. People walked past, saw them, and didn't grasp what it meant. Gear left by an old working doesn't look like an emergency around here. Someone's digging, he stepped away, he'll be back. Oliver never appeared. At home, they didn't miss him immediately. The people close to him knew about the trips underground, and knew he could drop out of sight for a day. The alarm went up when he stopped answering. That was when the search began, and it stretched out over many days. The first physical confirmation turned up almost at once. The bicycle was standing in the forest not far from the entrance, right where Oliver had left it. He hadn't ridden out of that forest. From that moment, the search focused on the entrance to the old working under the Schreckenberg. Police and rescue crews converged on the old mining field near Frohnau. Within a few hours, a normally empty forest turned into a site full of vehicles, floodlights, and people in helmets. At the entrance lay a backpack and clothing. Together with the bicycle, it added up to a picture that allows only one reading. He had changed before going down, taken his equipment, and gone below. The equipment never came back up. On the night leading into Thursday, crews with dogs went over both known entrances. The ordinary police routine ran alongside it. Investigators checked the missing man's contacts and the possibility that he had simply gone away and not come home. That line was closed quickly. Police spokeswoman Jana Ulbricht put it without softening. They had to prepare for the worst. That was also when the key fact about the site itself came out. Staff from the Saxon Mining Authority found that illegal passage, the hand-dug entry to the workings of the Kippenheiner Stollen. There had been no open door. A man had made one himself, and no documentation for that passage existed. For the rescuers, that changed everything. A legal mine has plans and a known geometry of passages. Here there was a narrow burrow of unknown length, leading into a section nobody had inspected in 100 years. They would be working blind in rock that had already moved once. and with the understanding that it was a matter of hours. If he is alive and trapped beneath the collapse, every day lost cuts the chances to almost nothing. Professionals were sent underground. The work was run by a special unit of the Annaberg-Buchholz City Fire Service, a mine and height rescue crew trained to operate in shafts and on ropes. Paul Reuter was in charge of it. The rescuers descended on ropes, securing themselves at every step. The task was an engineering one: work out where the hand-dug passage led, where it ran up against the collapsed section, and whether that point could be reached from another side. Here something Oliver himself never had came into play. Falk Seliger, a specialist from the Saxon Mining Authority, brought up historical plans of the workings for the rescuers, old drawings with long-forgotten passages on them. They used those to look for a way around. The reconnaissance went in through the mouth of the Schreckenberg drainage adit, an old passage built to carry water out of the mines. A ground-penetrating radar survey was planned as well, an instrument that looks through rock and shows the voids beneath a collapse. It all came down to one thing. Every attempt to get closer to the collapse zone meant the rescuers were putting themselves under unstable rock, going into the very place where a collapse had already happened. They worked in cramped space, in water, in the constant sound of small debris trickling down. Progress was measured in meters per day. At a certain point, the assessment became unambiguous. Going in any further was too dangerous for the rescuers themselves. Carrying on would very likely mean a second collapse, and that could put several rescuers at risk. The active search phase was wound down. They didn't stop looking, but the descents to the collapse ended. On the 15th of October, a week after he disappeared, 2 service dogs trained to locate deceased persons were brought into the search. Teams like that are rare in Germany, and they were driven in from far away. One was called Abby from a Saxon unit. The other was Manny from Bavaria. Both Belgian Malinois with full service training. They weren't sent into the adit itself. The dogs worked the surface and the accessible sections. Scent travels up from below through cracks and old ventilation connections. They went over the ground near Frohnau several times, on different circuits. There was a result. In the collapse zone, both dogs clearly marked the same spot, working independently of each other. 2 independent indications matching up is considered strong evidence. The police put it cautiously, but plainly. With very high probability, the missing man was beneath the collapse. The same day a side thread was closed, a pair of yellow rubber boots found earlier at the site did not belong to Oliver, and the police stated it directly. There was no sign that he was alive underground, and no sign that he had come out of the mountain. Formally, he was still listed as missing. In practice, the search was no longer being treated as a rescue of a living person. On the 22nd of October, the investigators published their findings. The criminal police established that the man had entered the working without permission, through an illegal passage. He most likely sustained fatal injuries in the collapse, which he had triggered himself while clearing a path for himself in the collapse zone of the old shaft. No signs of anyone else's involvement were found. Every version other than an accident was ruled out. There was nothing to support anything else, not among the people around him and not at the site. What remained was the geography, and that was harder. By the estimates, his body lies roughly 25 meters beneath the collapse. The working itself in that area goes down to a depth of around 40 meters. The published figures don't agree. In some reports, 25 meters is given as the depth from the surface, in others as the thickness of the rock above him. The reporting is contradictory, and nobody has determined the exact position. The dogs only narrowed the search area. Under a collapse like that, a few meters to one side means a different volume of work and a different price. At the end of October 2024, Oliver K. was officially declared dead. On the 25th, it was stated publicly. A little over 2 weeks passed between his disappearance and that announcement. For his family, those 2 weeks held the whole distance from "he's just running late" to "he will not come back out." Along with the official declaration came a question whose answer seems obvious. Recover Oliver from beneath the collapse. On the 24th of October, the recovery of his body was discussed by the Annaberg-Buchholz City Council. The story moved out of the realm of a rescue operation and into the realm of a municipal decision. The technical assessment came from the Saxon Mining Authority, and it was a heavy one. Reaching the point in question through the existing passages was impossible. The old shaft had collapsed, and the side galleries were blocked or led elsewhere. It would mean sinking a new vertical shaft from the surface, a full mine shaft with supports and ventilation. That was where the rescue part ended. This was mine construction. The work was costed at between 380,000 and 400,000 euros, with no guarantee of success. The shaft could come down beside the target and yield nothing, and after that, they would either have to stop or carry on for more money. There was also the risk to people. Any work in this rock meant a crew would once again be beneath rock that had already collapsed. Weighing all of it, the town ruled the operation disproportionate. Behind the cold wording stands a legal test, the balance between cost, risk, and the result that can realistically be achieved. By that test, an official recovery was ruled out. The decision was announced publicly, jointly with the police. The authorities said outright that his body would stay where it is. On the 26th of October, it went out through German outlets far beyond Saxony, and almost immediately a problem surfaced that nobody had thought about at first. Under German law, you can't simply leave a person underground. The Saxon Burial Act requires deceased persons to be interred in places designated for that purpose, cemeteries or other officially appointed sites. An abandoned mine working under a forest is not on that list. The situation was a rare one. Recovering the body had been ruled disproportionate, but without a special dispensation, the town would have been breaking its own law. The way out was found through an exemption. The Annaberg-Buchholz administration applied for a derogation from paragraph 18 of the Saxon Burial Act, official permission not to comply with the requirement of burial in a designated place. On the 29th of October, 2024, the health authority of the Erzgebirge district approved that exemption, and the state administration's press office confirmed the decision officially. From that day, the abandoned working under the Schreckenberg was legally designated as Oliver's final resting place. On paper, it is the burial site of one specific person, with no status as a monument or a memorial. The authorities planned no further measures. A decision like that is still rare in Germany. Normally, the state goes to very great expense to return the dead to their families. It's treated as a matter of dignity, not of accounting. Here, the deciding factor was the calculation of cost and risk, and that is exactly what caught the public. The line, up to 400,000 euros, sitting next to the word disproportionate. The first to object were the people who had known Oliver personally. Friends and acquaintances filed a petition demanding that the work continue and that the city council's decision not be the end of it. Friends launched a crowdfunding campaign. If the state considers 400,000 euros disproportionate, they would raise the money themselves. It did not change the town's official position. The permission had been granted, the status of the working had been settled, and no publicly funded work was planned. Something else did change. About 2 months after the disappearance, that illegal passage was filled in, and the remaining approaches to the old Frohnau mining field were closed off with it. The logic is clear. As long as the passage stays open, there is a risk of another unauthorized entry. Things did not get quieter. At the end of November 2024, new finds at the site brought the police out again. What exactly was found was never made public. By then, people were making deliberate trips to the former entrance. The German press used the phrase, a place of pilgrimage. People came to look, to leave something, to stand there for a while. Rumors started there too. The idea that Oliver hadn't died beneath the collapse at all, but had deliberately vanished and was living somewhere else. That version spread across forums and comment sections. There is nothing to support it. Against it stand the abandoned bicycle, the belongings left at the entrance, the independent indications of 2 dogs, and the results of the police check on his contacts. The rumor rests on exactly one thing. No one has seen his body. Uncertainty sits badly with facts and beautifully with speculation. In the autumn of 2025, the ground above the working was still fenced off by the mobile construction barrier put up right after the events. Hanging on it is a white banner with the words, "For Ollie, we're not leaving you behind." Friends put it there, and it is still there today. The story traveled far beyond the Ore Mountains. A blogger named Marcus from Dusseldorf, known online as Meki, took it up. He released 7 videos about the case, one of which drew around 100,000 views. One detail from his material was picked up by commenters. At the hand-dug passage, someone had noticed a strange sign, an image of a scarab. Treasure hunters linked it to the legends about markings above old caches. There is no documentary evidence for the sign or for the legends. It's talk, not fact. By the first anniversary, Oliver's friends declared that they would not back down. We started. We'll see it through. So far, their campaign has not led to any actual work. 34-year-old Oliver K. went into an old Saxon working through a passage he had dug himself and did not come out. The collapse, according to the police findings, he triggered himself. His body is believed to be about 25 meters beneath the collapse. The exact position is unknown. Recovering it was ruled disproportionate in cost and risk. The abandoned adit under the Schreckenberg is officially regarded as his grave. He remains there. The manhole cover had holes in it, which meant the shaft was breathing and the air down below was fine. That's how it looked from the street. Instruments would later show that oxygen levels down there were critically low. On the night of the 27th of July, 2019, 2 men went down into a shaft on the Karpovka embankment in St. Petersburg. Pavel Shpuntenkov, the creator of the channel Road to a Film, and Alexei Kulikov, known online as Megavolt. At 4 in the morning, contact was lost. Let's look at why a man with years of underground experience still went down. The channel's name sounded like a promise, Road to a Film. It was run by Pavel Shpuntenkov. According to one source, he was born on the 3rd of November, 1978, in the Belarusian town of Budakoshelevo. His age is trickier. In the summer of 2019, the press listed him as 40 and sometimes as 41. The reporting is inconsistent. Until 2016, he worked in music, then moved fully into video blogging. By the summer of 2019, Road to a Film had around 578,000 subscribers, and its videos had gathered roughly 72.5 million views. He put the channel's motto into words himself: "There isn't a single uninteresting person on this planet, and every life deserves either a book or a film." He traveled around the country filming the people who never make the news, long-haul truckers, residents of remote villages. In the channel description, he stated plainly what he wanted: to make a feature film. The blog was a stepping stone, a way to learn how to work with a camera and with people, hence the name, not the film itself, but the road toward it. He posted his last video on the 18th of July, 2019, a trip through the Altai region. His final 2 pieces were both shot there. 9 days passed between that upload and the night on the Karpovka. A little over a week later, Pavel found himself in a sealed concrete shaft beneath a sidewalk on the Petrograd side. He was looking for a new story and decided to film what lies directly under the feet of millions of people. The second man there that night was known by the handle Megavolt. His legal name was Alexei Kulikov. According to media reports, he was 33 years old in July of 2019. That figure appears in most publications and draws almost no disagreement. His life above ground looked entirely ordinary. For more than 10 years, he worked at Gorelektrotrans, the city enterprise that maintains St. Petersburg's trams and trolleybuses. He started as a conductor, then took the driver's seat of a tram at the Blokina depot, and later moved to the track service as a driver, the division that maintains the rails themselves. In 2010, the company newspaper ran a short piece about him. 3rd place in a professional skills competition. His second life happened online. A live journal blog under the same handle, devoted not to underground spaces, but to space itself, the history of cosmonautics and amateur rocketry. He didn't stop at writing. He gave talks at venues around the city and explained how engines work. The third part is the one that made him known across the city. Kulikov was considered one of the best-known urban explorers in St. Petersburg. Estimates of his underground experience vary. Some sources say more than 10 years, others around 15. The accounts differ, but the order of magnitude is the same everywhere. The portrait that emerges is not the familiar one. This wasn't a teenager with a flashlight climbing into a manhole on a dare, but a grown man with a technical profession and many years spent below ground. It was that experience that got him invited, and it's why his death can't be explained by saying he didn't know what he was getting into. The idea for the new episode came from a simple question. What's under the city? Pavel had in mind a story about sewer collectors, the invisible half of St. Petersburg. Pavel reached out to Kulikov. Choosing Kulikov made sense. He had years of descents behind him and a solid reputation in the community. That's what people do when they want to lower the risk. The subject, though, was new for the channel. Road to a Film was built on road trips and conversations, open spaces, daylight. Going underground demanded something else: tight quarters, artificial light. The material called for 2 cameras. What the available reporting doesn't contain is any information about scouting the site beforehand. It's unknown whether either of them had been down that shaft earlier, whether the air was ever tested there, whether they knew what waited behind the hatch by building number 19. There's no data. That left the timing. They agreed on nighttime. A city collector isn't a natural cavity. It was built by people. It has a design, a schematic, and an operating authority. From the outside, a shaft like that doesn't look like a dangerous place. A round cover set in the asphalt, the shaft below it, rungs or a ladder leading down, a platform at the bottom. But for an untrained person, going down there is dangerous. There's one detail that makes the picture look even calmer. According to one source, the manhole cover was perforated, meaning it had openings and didn't block air exchange. From the street, that reads as one thing only: the shaft is breathing, the atmosphere below is normal. And this is exactly where the trap is. The main hazard of a collector isn't visible in any way, not in its construction, not in the cleanliness of the walls, not in the holes in the cover. Dense gases sit right at the bottom, and a small flow of air from above doesn't push them out. Whether that group had a gas detector isn't mentioned in the available reporting. There's no data. All we know is that standard procedure for municipal utility crews doesn't begin a descent at all without such a measurement. Let's go through what accumulates at the bottom of a shaft like that. In household sewage, organic matter breaks down without access to air, and that process yields 2 main products: methane and hydrogen sulfide. Industrial safety specialists call them among the most dangerous underground gases. The danger they pose is twofold. Hydrogen sulfide is toxic in itself, and at high concentrations can quickly incapacitate a person. While the sense of smell dulls to it, the odor stops registering before the threat is gone. Methane isn't poisonous, but it takes up volume. Both gases do the same thing. They displace oxygen from an enclosed space. From here, it becomes arithmetic. Ordinary air is about 20% oxygen, and as long as that share holds, the body notices nothing. When it drops to roughly 13, a person can lose consciousness within a short time, with no pain, no shortness of breath in the usual sense, often with no warning at all. The brain simply never gets the signal. It responds to a buildup of carbon dioxide, not to a shortage of oxygen. Temperature is a separate factor. Heat at the surface speeds up the breakdown of the waste, and gas forms faster. It also weakens natural circulation. The exchange between the shaft and the street nearly stops. A shaft that ventilated itself in the spring becomes, in July, an enclosed space with little air exchange. July of 2019 was hot in St. Petersburg. The descent on the Karpovka fell squarely within that period, hence the protocol used by municipal crews. Before work begins, the air in the shaft is checked with a gas detector, then fresh air is blown in from above with a fan, and only after that is a person allowed down, on a safety harness and under a partner's watch. On the 26th of July, 2019, they met on the Petrograd side. The address? The embankment of the Karpovka River, the shaft by building number 19. The Karpovka is a small channel linking the Bolshaya Nevka to the Malaya Nevka. The embankment here is narrow and lined with apartment buildings. They set the meeting for the night. According to the available reporting, there were few passers-by on the embankment after dark. Underground, in any case, there's no difference between day and night. 2 men went down, taking 2 cameras with them. Exactly how deep they descended can't be established. This is where the sources diverge the most. Some publications describe a shaft about 5 meters deep. Others say around 10. Still others write of several dozen meters. The accounts contradict one another, and there's no single figure in the open material. All that's clear is that it was a vertical shaft with a ladder going down. An acquaintance of Pavel's stayed at the top, the standard arrangement. One person keeps contact, knows the location and the timing, and understands when to raise the alarm. They agreed to check in by phone. From here, the timeline rests on the single recorded point in time. At around 4 in the morning, contact with the men below stopped. After that, there's a gap in the picture of events. What happened in the shaft between the descent and 4 in the morning has been reconstructed only from indirect signs, from the positions in which the two were found, and from the state of the air. There are no direct witnesses. The reconstruction goes like this. Spuntenkov was climbing down the ladder and at some point lost consciousness. He could no longer hold on and fell onto the inspection platform, which explorers themselves call the little balcony, a technical ledge inside the shaft. He was found there. The first version, voiced by rescuers on the day of the incident, was simpler. The blogger fell from a height and the urban explorer died from oxygen deprivation. That wording spread across the news feeds on the 27th of July and was treated as the main account for the first 24 hours. Almost immediately a second reading appeared, one that reversed the order of events. The fall was preceded by exposure to accumulated gas. First, a person loses consciousness from a lack of oxygen and only then goes down. Under that explanation, the fall becomes a consequence rather than the root cause. By that point, the air in the shaft was not breathable. Later measurements confirmed it. There's no disagreement about the composition of the atmosphere, only about the specific numbers. The most important part here is the absence of any warning. A person may not feel short of breath, doesn't cough, feels no pain. When the oxygen share drops below the critical level, coordination disappears and thinking dulls. From the outside, it looks like a sudden weakness, and the whole thing lasts seconds. Publications after the tragedy noted it plainly. Both men apparently had little or no time to react. Kulikov's long habit of reading an underground space was of no use here. There was nothing to read. Up at the surface, nobody knew any of this yet. What comes next is the key episode of this story. Kulikov went down to his fallen companion and tried to bring him back up. He did it in an atmosphere that had just incapacitated a healthy adult right in front of him. There was no margin of time. Air doesn't become breathable because the person going down is more experienced. The rule of underground safety is stated harshly. Going down after a casualty into a gas-filled shaft without breathing apparatus is prohibited, with no exceptions for experience or training. In the instructions used by municipal services, it's a separate clause. Kulikov knew that prohibition. A man with years of descents behind him, a technical profession, and public lectures to his name would have understood how dangerous such an attempt was. And yet, he went down. The explanation is simple. He was trying to save his partner. There was no time to go back for equipment. Breathing apparatus has to be fetched from somewhere else. And down below lay a man who needed help immediately. In a moment like that, a decision is made under enormous pressure. The urge to help right now can outweigh the knowledge of the rule. Kulikov lost consciousness next to Pavel. Both remained inside the shaft. In the dry official summaries the next day, it was described in a single line. An urban explorer died from oxygen deprivation while trying to help. Behind that line is a decision made in a matter of seconds in an attempt to help a partner. He went down to his companion, but without breathing apparatus there was no margin of time. On the surface, Pavel's acquaintance had been waiting the whole time. When contact was lost and nobody answered his calls, he stayed up top and called the emergency services. That decision most likely preserved a third life. On the morning of the 27th of July, emergency ministry crews arrived at the shaft. Descending into a shaft where the air is unfit to breathe is possible only with a self-contained apparatus, one carrying its own supply of air. An ordinary filtering gas mask is useless. It cleans air, but it doesn't create the oxygen that isn't down there. Bringing someone up out of a narrow vertical shaft is a technical problem of its own. Inside a shaft like that, you can't turn around or work side by side standing upright. You need a winch, cables, a safety line for everyone going down, and constant control from above. Rescuers brought both men to the surface. Neither survived. Investigators and representatives of the city services came out to the site. Identification was quick. One was known from a channel with 500,000 subscribers, the other from the city's underground community. Following its initial work, the investigative committee reported that no evidence of a violent death was found. It's a standard formulation, one that moves the inquiry into the territory of an accident. By midday, the news had spread across the feeds. The first reports were mostly about the blogger. What exactly had happened in the shaft, nobody had yet explained officially. The first concrete result was the numbers on the air. The atmosphere in the shaft was tested with instruments. Oxygen levels that were critically low. The exact value differs from report to report. Some publications give 8% instead of the normal 20%. Other material uses the phrase less than 13%. The accounts contradict one another, and there's no single official figure in the open sources. What matters is something else. Both values fall below the threshold at which a person loses consciousness, and the lower one means it was unsafe to remain below, even briefly. On the 29th of July, the findings of the St. Petersburg forensic medical examiners appeared. The cause of death was given as asphyxia due to oxygen deprivation, not injuries. After the examination, the initial version stopped adding up. The account pointing to exposure to the hazardous atmosphere had forensic backing, while injuries no longer explained the deaths on their own. The first day's publications had described two separate misfortunes, but now a single cause connected them. Full clarity, even so, never arrived. Some sources continued, even after the findings, to describe the injuries from the fall as a separate contributing factor in the deaths. The sources diverge, and reconciling them into one version from open publications isn't possible. The precise composition of the gas mixture at the bottom of the shaft isn't given in the available material. How much methane was there? How much hydrogen sulfide? Those figures were never made public, nor was there any report on how the inquiry ended. There's no data on final conclusions or on anyone being held responsible. While the investigation was underway, the underground community put forward an explanation of its own. People who have been going into these shafts for years. Their version was built around the chemistry of the wastewater. An urban explorer named Davidov pointed out in a comment to one outlet that St. Petersburg's drainage system in places combines storm drains with the combined sewer network. Industrial and household chemical agents end up in the flow, and the decomposition of this mixture, in his view, could have displaced oxygen quickly. He named the heat separately. High temperatures hindered circulation, and the exchange between the shaft and the street had all but stopped. And here lies one of the main discrepancies. Some publications call the site of the deaths a storm drain shaft, others a collector for household wastewater. The difference is fundamental. A storm system connects to the street through intake grates and receives a constant flow of fresh air, whereas a system that takes in no rainwater stays sealed. The sources diverge, and the type of network can't be determined definitively from open sources. For anyone going down, the name of the network guarantees nothing by itself. Not the depth, not the age of the structure, not the condition of the walls, but the presence or absence of a constant flow of fresh air. After the tragedy, the city's water utility, Vodokanal, issued a short statement. Only the enterprise's own specialists have the right to open hatches and inspect the networks. The statement didn't blame the men who died, it simply restated the protocol. The argument about the specific mechanism, the chemical agents, the type of network, the temperature, doesn't cancel out one conclusion. Checking the composition of the air at the bottom of a shaft without an instrument is impossible. Not by sight, not by smell, not by experience. It would be a mistake to think this only happens to amateurs with a camera. Incidents like this occur regularly with people for whom going down into a shaft is a routine shift. Publications from that same period list, case after case, Cheetah, 2 deaths, Balashika, 2, the Moscow region, 2 more, Ufa, 5 in a single episode. These were municipal utility workers, people with training and clearance, not passers-by who wandered in. Cases like these bring criminal charges under the article on violations of occupational safety requirements with penalties of up to 5 years of imprisonment. The wording of the charge is almost always the same. The descent began without testing the air or without ventilation. The procedure itself was written down long ago and hasn't changed. Every step in it has its own job. The instrument detects an invisible threat. The fan changes the composition of the air. The harness holds the person. The partner monitors the descent from above. Each one seems unnecessary right up until the moment it gets skipped. The last safeguard is the one that fails most often. The person up top sees a casualty and goes down after them, even though, without breathing apparatus, there's nothing they can do. The reason is simple. In most of the cases described, the second person to die is the one who went down after the first. Sometimes the third and fourth are those who went after the second. That's how the episode in Ufa unfolded, where 5 people died. The clause prohibiting solo rescue attempts was written after reviewing dozens of identical cases. On the Karpovka, exactly that sequence played out. The media footprint left by the two men turned out to be very different. In the first days, the press wrote almost exclusively about the blogger, a recognizable name, 500,000 subscribers. The second was mentioned without a name, an urban explorer, his companion. Later, pieces about Kulikov came out too, about his work at the tram depot, about the blog on space, about his lectures for the public. The channel's audience responded in its own way. Subscribers suggested gathering the recorded material and releasing the feature film, after all, the very one Pavel had been working toward for years. The underground community left memorial posts and tribute videos for both of them. Some publications reduced the story to a ready-made label, a death for likes. And yet they were preparing an episode with an experienced guide, not wandering in blindly for one spectacular shot. That, perhaps, is the main lesson of the Karpovka. Experience underground helps you read a structure, find a route, and keep your bearings in the dark. It doesn't replace the instrument that measures the air. Years of descents and 8% oxygen at the bottom of a shaft belong to different planes and don't offset each other in any way. For the city's underground community, the Karpovka also remained a story about Megavolt, who tried to help his fallen partner and also died in the incident. The trip out of the city takes less than an hour. The bus runs toward the Kajabay estuary, out to the village of Kolodna Balka in the Bilyayevka district, an ordinary suburban route. That bus is the last place anyone sees Konstantin. Beyond it begins a stretch where there is almost no testimony at all. His family would later say that he planned to spend the weekend underground with an overnight stay. For a man who had been coming here for years, that did not sound strange. One Odessa publication adds a detail. The acquaintances who arrived with him went off to a shop, and Konstantin, rather than waiting for them, carried on alone toward the catacombs. Only one outlet ever reported this, and there is no way to verify it, but it fits everything else known about him. Underground, he went alone. At home, there was an arrangement, the usual one for people who go down into the catacombs, a check-in time for his return. The only safety net there is, if a person has not come out by the agreed hour, it is time to act on the surface. His mother, Elena Sharikova, expected him back that evening. That evening, he did not come out. His phone stayed silent. By morning, Konstantin still had not called from the surface. 2.5 years of going underground, a familiar entrance, a familiar district. Not a single reason to worry, except one. He had not come back on time. To understand why the alarm was not raised straight away, you have to see him through the eyes of the people who knew him from underground. He was 22 years old, according to the age given by Interfax Ukraine. Some outlets wrote 21. The sources disagree, and the exact figure has to be left with a caveat. According to Komsomolskaya Pravda, he was studying at a polytechnic institute in Odessa. Within Odessa's underground community, a scene with long traditions, its own maps and its own clubs, Konstantin was not considered a strong operator. A club review written by one of the searchers puts it bluntly. His level of underground travel was low. What follows is a list that would alarm any caver. He did not use cartography at all, neither other people's plans nor sketches of his own. He kept almost no route notes. He went alone, without a good light source, and he pushed into flooded workings with no equipment, into sections where the passage dips underwater, and there may be no way back. Now, about where he was going down. These are quarries. For centuries people cut out coquina here, the soft stone that Odessa itself is built from. The city was quite literally lifted out from under its own feet. The scale is hard to hold in your head. In 1998, the total length of the system was estimated at roughly 2,500 kilometers. Some estimates push the figure to 5,000 or 6,000. Precise data does not exist and cannot exist. There is no single complete map. The defining feature of this labyrinth is not its size, but its lack of logic. Passages were cut wherever the right layer of stone ran, and in whatever way suited a particular crew in a particular year. Junctions, dead ends, and drifts all look the same walls, the same height. A person takes 3 turns and can no longer say which one was the second. Then there is the water. A significant part of the workings beneath Kolodna Balka is flooded with groundwater. The level shifts, galleries go under, whole sections become impassable without gear. Experienced underground explorers deal with this using a map, markings, a line, and a partner. Konstantin had none of that. He navigated by memory and by the threads of passage he knew. Kolodna Balka was his regular ground. He came here often, he knew the entrance and the nearby districts. On the evening of the 7th of January, Konstantin does not come home. During the night, his mother is told he has not come out. The family's reaction is typical. Most likely he has been delayed. Maybe he decided to sleep underground, just as he had planned, and pushed his exit time back. That logic was backed by the city's own experience. People who get lost in the Odessa catacombs usually walk out by themselves, within a few hours, occasionally within a day. The caver Igor Grek told an Odessa publication that people get seriously lost in the catacombs once every 2 or 3 years. The event is so rare that it is never anybody's first thought. So, in the first 24 hours, no missing person report is filed. Nobody calls out the rescuers. They wait. The morning of the 8th of January passes without Konstantin appearing on the surface. Underground, conditions do not change at all, and that is exactly where the danger lies. The temperature in the catacombs sits at around plus 12 to 14 degrees Celsius all year round. Not freezing, but with high humidity and no movement, the person gradually loses body heat. And the longer they sit in one place, the worse they think and the less strength they have to walk. Judging by what the searchers would find, he had no food with him, no water, no thermos flasks. All of it had been left somewhere else. By the morning of the 8th, he has been underground for more than half a day. The check-in system that his life depended on had not yet been put in place during those hours. The waiting breaks on the afternoon of the 8th of January. Friends and relatives pick up flashlights and go down themselves. On a human level, that is an understandable decision. By the standards of an organized search, it is a risky one. There is no command post, no log of who went in, no division of the area into sectors. People go in wherever they can, from different entrances, one for an hour, another for half a day. The Club Review would call this a lack of system. The same sections get walked several times over, because nobody records where they have already been. Other districts are searched by nobody at all. Everyone assumes the neighboring group went in there. Over 2 days, the ground underground fills with footprints, and not one of them can be attributed to Konstantin anymore. There is a second cost as well. During these trips, one of the searchers is lost. A man who went down to save someone else cannot find his way back. They find him 7 hours later. Konstantin, in all likelihood, lost his bearings too. The difference is that the searcher was missed immediately, and people knew roughly which district he should be in. In these catacombs, both loners get lost and people who come in with a flashlight and a group. Only on the 9th of January do the parents go to the emergency service and the police. By that point, about 2 days have passed since he was last seen, precisely the window that search practice considers the most productive, when the person may still be mobile and able to respond. That period was largely lost. On the 10th of January, everything at Kolodna Balka changes. Scattered forays turn into an operation. The key decision is made immediately. The command post is set up not on the surface, beside the vehicles, but below, at an underground base near the estuary entrance. On the surface, it would be cut off from people working kilometers into the passages. Down below, the commander sees every group in person. Record-keeping appears. Every group signs in, who is in it, which district, what time they went in, and most importantly, they leave a check-in time for their return. The rule that failed to protect Konstantin becomes law for everyone searching for him. The emergency service, the police, and volunteer underground explorers from Odessa's clubs join the effort. People who know the system better than anyone. The numbers vary between sources, and this is one of those cases where the honest thing is to give all of them. Interfax Ukraine reported 78 participants. Other publications gave 80 and 117 people, 24 of whom were emergency service personnel. Some materials spoke of more than 200 over the whole course of the work. The data contradicts itself. Some were counting a single shift, others everyone who passed through the operation. The method they choose is the only one available: systematic sweeping. Sections already covered are searched a second and a third time. In a labyrinth where everything looks identical, one pass guarantees nothing. Shifts run around the clock. Underground, there is no difference between day and night, only the schedule of who goes in, when. A trace turns up almost immediately. 20 minutes into the work of the very first group in one of the dead ends, the searchers see somebody's camp. It is set up the way a hiker would do it. On the floor, a foam camping mat, insulating a sleeper from the cold stone. Beside it, an unopened sleeping bag. Somebody had only just arrived and was settling in. The searchers record the inventory item by item. A headlamp, a second backup flashlight, 2 thermos flasks of tea, food, a denim backpack, city clothes, 2 mobile phones, a sheet of paper with notes on it. The belongings were Konstantin's. The distance to the entrance is given differently in different sources. The club report by one of the searchers says 300 meters from the central entrance. Interfax Ukraine reported a kilometer from the main entrance and said the belongings were found on the 3rd day of the operation. The data contradicts itself, and the difference matters. 300 meters is the threshold of the system. A kilometer is genuine depth inside the labyrinth. What the sources do not dispute is the state of the camp. No signs of a struggle, no signs of a collapse, nothing scattered, nothing damaged. The belongings lay there as though their owner had stepped away briefly and meant to be back in a few minutes. For the searchers, this was both a breakthrough and a setback. The breakthrough, in 20 minutes, they had a reference point inside an endless system. The setback, from that point, not a single trace led anywhere. There is only one way out of a dead end, back into the main passage, and beyond that began hundreds of kilometers with nothing left to indicate a direction. What mattered most was what was not in that dead end. The headlamp stayed at the camp, so did the backup flashlight. The food and both thermos flasks were still there. The club report puts it without softening. The owner of these things left his base without his main light source and without food, which means he was not going far. Nobody sets off on a multi-hour route, leaving all of his light and all of his water on the floor. This looks much more like a short trip out to check the neighboring passage and come straight back. He probably still had a weak backup light on him, one good for only a few minutes. What happened next can only be reconstructed as a supposition. If that weak light began to fade, Konstantin may have picked up his pace, trying to get back to camp while he could still see something. In a labyrinth, hurrying raises the chance of a mistake at a turn. He may then have lost his remaining light. Without a lamp in the catacombs, you see nothing. Not gloom. There is no ambient light at all. The eyes do not adapt, because there is nothing to adapt to. Coquina walls feel identical everywhere. A person can move for hours and end up back where he started, without ever realizing it. Without a map, without markings, and without a partner, getting back to the camp became a matter of luck. There is also a detail that was never explained. Konstantin's father later called the author of the club report and said that something was missing from the recovered belongings. Exactly what, it was never possible to establish. From the dead end with the camp, the operation spreads outward in rings. The nearer districts first, the far ones as the nearer ones come up empty. The final figure for a week of work, around 300 kilometers of underground passage, walked on foot and marked on the command post's chart. The whole system is estimated in thousands of kilometers, but the only search that made sense covered the ground a man with one weak flashlight could reach from his camp. At the same time, work goes on above ground. They comb the area around the village of Kolodna Balka and the shore of the Khadjabay estuary, in case Konstantin came out through some other opening his family did not know about. Water is a task of its own. For the flooded galleries, they bring in equipment that allows work in submerged workings. There they check the deep sections, the very ones Konstantin, by his friend's account, used to go into with no gear at all. According to Komsomolskaya Pravda, the service dogs led the searchers to water several times. Acquaintances confirmed that he sometimes swam in the underground lakes. That line looked promising right up until one detail. That day, according to the same sources, Konstantin had a throat infection. A person running a fever does not usually get into freezing underground water. They checked it anyway. Nothing came of the water, or the shoreline, or the 300 kilometers of dry passage. Not a scrap of clothing was left behind, not a discarded item, not a mark on the dusty floor, not a sign on a wall, and almost everyone who realizes they are lost leaves marks in the catacombs. After the camp in the dead end, the person's trail seems to end just beyond the turn. On the 16th of January, the command post makes the decision everyone working underground had hoped to avoid. The rescue operation is officially wound down. There are 2 formal reasons. The first is the danger to the rescuers themselves. People had been working around the clock for almost a week in damp conditions, in a place where coquina ceilings hold worse than usual after rain. The second is the complete absence of any trace. The caving expert Leonid Ashkolenenko compared this search with the usual cases. In his words, people lost in the catacombs are normally found within 2 or 3 days, and they are found by following a chain of clues. Someone who is lost starts leaving a story behind him. Abandoned items, writing and arrows on the walls, marks in the dust, the remains of fires. The searcher follows it. Here, there was nothing to read. The rescuer's conclusion was stark. He is not in the part of the system that has been searched. The club report sums it up in its own way. Over 100 hours of work by dozens of people, the last blank spots on the map of that district were swept. The operation did more than it had to. It closed the map. After the 16th of January, the center of gravity shifts to the surface. The police take up lines of inquiry that have nothing to do with searching the catacombs. His mother, Elena Sharikova, refuses to accept that outcome. She is certain her son is alive, and she says so publicly. No body had been found. There was no proof of death. Only an empty dead end with his belongings and 300 kilometers of passage where nothing turned up. Formally, it is hard to argue with her. The absence of a person underground is not the same thing as proof that he came out. There was no answer, and the theories multiplied. In the winter of 2012, the Odessa press counted 6 of them. The first, and the main one, has not changed since the belongings were found. He became lost after losing his light source and could not get back. It explains everything except one thing, why neither he nor any trace of him was ever found. The second is a collapse. You could walk past a section like that at a distance of 2 meters and notice nothing. The third is water. Flooded workings entered without gear, dogs leading to water. The lakes checked separately. Nothing. The fourth moves to the surface entirely. Konstantin never stayed underground at all, but left his belongings behind and simply went away. The motives suggested were avoiding the draft and debts. The police checked reports of sightings of a similar man around the region. Not one of them was confirmed. The weak point is obvious. Staging a scene with an abandoned backpack and 2 mobile phones takes calculation, and at the camp, everything looked like an ordinary overnight stay, interrupted. The 5th and 6th were frankly fantastical. Nobody took them seriously, but they lived a long time because they filled the space where an answer should have been. A year later, the press secretary of the Odessa police, Vladimir Shablienko, drew a line under it. All versions, including those voiced by the media and on forums, had been checked and none confirmed. The case stayed open. The man has not been found, no death has been established, the circumstances have not been reconstructed. By the winter of 2013, the family is still waiting for news. The file sits without movement, and not a single new fact has been added. In March of that year, the parents turned to the participants of a popular television project about psychics. The material from that television project quotes a statement by one of its participants, Yaroslava Fedorova, that Konstantin is alive and that before his disappearance he was facing a difficult choice. It produced nothing verifiable, no location, no direction, no date. For a family that, for a year, had been told nothing by anyone, this was not a search for the truth, but a way of not giving up. No organized second operation is ever carried out at Kolodna Balka. The reason is practical. Repeating the January operation would mean walking through sectors that had already been checked and exposing the participants to additional risk. What the case does leave behind is its place in Odessa's underground community, as a lesson. The conclusions of the club review are almost painfully simple. Every trip must have a check-in time, and there must be someone on the surface counting it down. Light must be duplicated, 2 independent sources as a minimum, and never leaving camp without the main lamp. A route needs to be recorded, at the very least as a sketch. Flooded sections are not entered without gear. And the main point, the one still argued about today, going underground alone. 9 years later, the story gets a sequel, but not where anyone was expecting it. On the 24th of February 2021, a catacomb explorer goes down into the tunnels beneath Zhvanetsky Boulevard in Odessa itself and finds human remains, which he reports to the authorities. Nearby are a backpack and a homemade breathing tube. The combination of the finds suggests that the person appears to have entered the tunnels knowingly. Within the city's community, people almost immediately believed the missing man had been found. The police confirm the fact of the discovery itself, but do not disclose the results of the identification. And this is where the theory has to be stopped and checked, because it comes apart at 2 points. The first is timing. The report on the discovery describes a man who went missing 6 years earlier, that is, around 2015. Konstantin Sharikov disappeared in 2012. A gap of 3 years is not a rounding error. The second is the place. Zhvanetsky Boulevard is in the central part of Odessa. The Kolodna Balka catacombs lie under a village in the Belyaevka district, outside the city. Formally, the system is a single one, but the sections are tens of kilometers apart, and there is no connecting route between them for a person without gear and without a map. No official confirmation that the remains found belong to Konstantin Sharikov has ever been published. This is a theory, and not the best supported of the available theories. A camera on a cable shows a man 180 feet down. He's moving his arms. He's alive, and nobody can reach him. The walls of a century-old shaft crumble at every touch, and a rock has already cracked one rescuer's helmet. March 2011, Jersey Valley, Nevada. 28-year-old Devin Westenskow drove out during his off hours to look at some old mines and fell into a shaft that wasn't on any state hazard list. What comes next is 2 days, a dozen agencies, and a decision nobody wanted to make. Devin James Westenskow was born on the 13th of May, 1982, in Layton, Utah. He grows up further north, in Evanston, Wyoming, right on the Utah line. His parents, Carl and Denise Westenskow, live there too. It's an ordinary biography for the American West. School, a family early on, work with his hands. By 28, he's running a 4-man drilling crew and living at 2 addresses, the house in Evanston and rotation housing in Battle Mountain, Nevada. The schedule is typical for the whole region, 3 weeks on site, then the long drive home across the desert. He's divorced, raising 5 children, and not long before March of 2011, he's planning to marry again, without a big ceremony. People who knew him describe him the same way: quiet, hard-working, no show about him. In his free time, he hunts and rides a snowmobile. Devin likes to look into old abandoned workings. The shift ends, home is 600 miles away, and all around there are empty slopes with dark holes in them. His crew's site sits in Jersey Valley, in the far eastern part of Pershing County, northeast of Reno. Open desert, the nearest town is tens of miles of bad road away, and the signal doesn't reach everywhere. There's a geothermal power plant here, run by a company called Ormat. The idea is simple enough. Hot water from deep underground rises up a well, gives up its heat, and goes back down. The 15-megawatt plant came online in 2010, and drilling crews kept working the site after the launch. The Murphy complex was first worked from about 1895. The last workings shut down in 1945, and people simply walked away, leaving everything as it was. The scale of the problem shows up at the state level. Nevada counts somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 features left over from a century and a half of mining. Shafts, adits, sinkholes, collapsed chambers. Around 50,000 of them are considered seriously dangerous to people or livestock. You can fall in or be overcome by a lack of oxygen. A program to inventory and seal abandoned mine sites has been running in the state since 1987. Specialists drive out to the sites, put them on the map, install fencing and warning signs, and permanently close the worst of them. The work has gone on for decades and keeps running into the same 2 limits: money and the sheer size of the territory. A site has to be found, reached across open country, assessed and closed. There are tens of thousands of them, and only a handful of crews. The shaft Devin Westenskow fell into was not on the list of hazardous sites. It had never been inspected, described, or mapped as a risk. As far as state records were concerned, that opening didn't exist. On the ground, that meant nothing at all. An empty slope in Jersey Valley looks the same whether the shaft is on the books or not. The difference is only on paper. And here the second peculiarity of old workings comes in. A vertical shaft in rock doesn't always look like a well. The collar can be half filled with loose rock, framed by the remains of rotted timber, screened by brush. From the side, it reads as a shallow pit. The light drops a few feet and runs into darkness, and the eye fills in the rest on its own, usually in the direction of, "It isn't deep here." Underneath that harmless-looking pit, there can be 165 feet of nothing. The shift ends that day, and Devin and two co-workers drive out to look at the old workings. It isn't a work assignment. 3 grown men from the same site going to see abandoned mines in their off hours. That's how every source describes it. He was with colleagues from the drilling crew. Around midday, he falls into an open shaft. What exactly happened in that second isn't described in a single official document. Whether he stepped right up to the edge, whether the rim of the collar gave way under him, whether he slipped on loose rock, there's no data. The obituary puts it briefly. He slipped and fell. The Lander County Sheriff's Office gets the report of the fall at noon. His companions called for help right away and did not go down themselves. Both stayed on the surface, unhurt. Their names and ages never appeared in any publication. All that's known is that both worked on the geothermal project. The depth of the fall differs from source to source, and that's the first of the contradictions that will follow this story all the way through. Some publications say 180 feet, others 185, others 190, and a few pieces speak of a fall of nearly 200 feet. Later, when they find him, the depth will be put at 182 feet, about 55 meters, 182 feet of free fall down a narrow rock shaft, the height of an 18-story building. A person covers that distance in about 3.5 seconds. What's left at the top is 2 men who were talking with him a minute ago, and a hole that gives back nothing you can make out. Word of the fall goes to Lander County Search and Rescue, and then comes the thing that slows down every operation out here: geography. Jersey Valley lies well away from anywhere people live. The road in is rough and empty, and a convoy with equipment needs time just to get there. The first thing the arriving teams run into is the ground around the collar itself. The slope sheds material, the footing slides, and getting near the edge of the hole is dangerous even from above. There's no working that evening. At 8:42, the search is suspended because of darkness and the danger of the terrain. The decision is standard and correct. At night, on a sliding slope beside an open shaft, any attempt would put another person at risk. But for the people up top, it means one thing: the man below will spend the night alone. The rescuers stay by the shaft until morning. There's no information at all. Nobody knows whether he's alive, whether he can hear, whether he's responding. Voice contact doesn't work. The depth and the fallen rock swallow everything. On top of that, there's a separate problem. There's no cell service at the site. Contact with the outside world goes by radio, satellite phone, or by people sent out to where there's coverage. News from the scene will come out a full day late, and that will become the source of the confusion over dates. During the night, Devin's parents, Carl and Denise, arrive at the site. They'll stay there for the rest of the operation. By Thursday morning, it's clear that Lander County can't handle this alone, and neighboring counties join in, along with mine rescue teams from a working mine and federal agencies. At first light, equipment shows up that wasn't there the day before. The rescuers lower a robotic camera into the shaft on a cable. The standard move when a person can't go down, but you need to know what's there. The cable pays out foot by foot. At about 182 feet, the picture on the monitor stops on a man. The camera shows broken rock and collapsed material at the bottom of the shaft, partially blocking access to Devin. The way to him is complicated by rock that came down with him or after him. That changes the math from the start. Even if someone did get down there, lifting him out with a single pull on a rope wasn't going to work. And the camera shows the main thing: he's breathing. The same shot gives the other half of the picture. Serious head injuries are visible. Later, when medical staff put the data together, the list of injuries will read fractures to the jaw and shoulders and a lung injury. From that minute, it's a rescue operation. The man has been found, he's alive, he's there on the screen, and the whole task comes down to one thing: get him out. The monitor becomes the only channel between the surface and the bottom. People are standing up top, looking at a living man 180 feet under their boots, and they can't pass him a single word. In rescue work, that's rare. Usually it's the other way around. You can reach the casualty, but you don't know whether he's alive. Here, everything is reversed. Alive, that much is certain. Reaching him is the question, and the answer will take another day to look for. The problem turned out to be the shaft itself. The moment the team starts down, the walls crumble at every touch. Every movement of the man on the rope knocks stones loose below him. A falling rock strikes one of the rescuers and cracks his helmet. The rescuers managed to get to a point about 50 feet from him. 50 feet? Some 15 meters. He's in sight. Measured against the full depth, they've come almost all the way, and past that, the wall simply won't hold. The team is brought back up. The first attempt confirms what everyone already suspected. The shaft is destroying itself, and any human presence inside speeds up the collapse. What's left up top is a monitor that still shows a living man. The evening footage gives them the reason nobody walks back to the trucks. There's movement in the picture. He's moving his arms. On Friday, at around 3 in the morning, the camera records raised arms. For the parents standing by the shaft into their second day, that's direct proof. Their son is alive. He's conscious enough to move, and he's down there alone. For the rescuers, the same image works differently. It raises the price of every hour and makes the decision about another descent that much harder to carry. By this point, agencies from all over the region are working the site. Search and rescue units from Lander and Pershing counties, the Washoe County Rapid Deployment Team, professional mine rescue crews from Newmont's working mine, specialists in underground accidents, rescuers from the Naval Air Station at Fallon, and the Air Service Access Air. Also on site, the Bureau of Land Management, the Nevada Department of Public Safety, the State Division of Minerals, the Division of Emergency Management, and the Occupational Safety Agency. Staff from the Ormat Geothermal Project and volunteers help out. That's a very large coalition for one man in one hole. In its makeup, it's comparable to a major mine disaster. The crumbling wall cancels out what all of those agencies can do. Nobody has a way to put a structure inside a century-old shaft that will hold the rock back. Casing the shaft with pipe means weeks of work and heavy equipment that isn't on site. Opening it up from the top means bringing everything down. Sending a rescuer down fast means putting both the rescuer and Devin at risk. The night goes by looking for an option that doesn't exist. Early in the morning, the rescuers go for a second attempt. The result repeats down to the details. The rock comes down, and the team has to pull back. 2 units worked in that shaft, and in the state, they're considered the strongest there are. Their conclusion is unambiguous. Roping down into this working safely is not possible. Bureau of Land Management spokeswoman Jolynn Worley describes the situation plainly. The mine is so unstable that the walls collapse and rocks come down on the rescuers' helmets with every attempt to get to him. These people will do everything they can to save him, she adds, but they truly cannot reach him. The attempt would create a fatal risk to the rescuers themselves. Her colleague Doran Sanchez speaks about the cracked helmet and about both teams being pulled out. On the other side of the scale sit numbers that people in this profession know by heart. Since 1869, in 39 mine accidents in the United States, 151 rescuers have died, 17 of them in 3 incidents after the year 2000. Every one of those figures means the same thing. Rescuers died while trying to help. A failed rescue operation adds a second tragedy to the first. After the risk assessment, the operation is ended. In the paperwork, it will be called a decision to end the work. In substance, it's a decision not to expose the rescuers to a fatal risk inside an unstable working. It's made with a living man at the bottom, and everyone on that site understands that. The camera is left in the shaft. It keeps sending pictures. By morning, the picture on the monitor changes. There's no more movement. He's breathing, but not moving. His condition is deteriorating from the injuries he sustained. The record of the operation notes a short farewell ceremony at the shaft. His parents are on site through all of it. Closer to midday, the video indicates that he has stopped breathing. The Pershing County coroner confirms the death remotely from the camera footage, by video, because there's still no way to get to him. Sources differ on the time. Some publications say 11:55, others 12:30. The date is the same in all of them. Friday, the 4th of March, 2011. A little under 2 days had passed since the fall. The official cause, injuries sustained in a fall from a great height. The delay in news from the site will later tangle the timeline in the press. The story is made public only on Saturday, the 5th of March. That's why most newspaper accounts shift the date of death, and some outlets list Saturday as the day it happened altogether. The tally of the operation is dry. 2 days, a dozen agencies, 2 attempted descents, a cracked helmet, a working camera. The conditions did not allow a single rescuer to get to Devin Westenskow. The closest anyone came to him was 50 feet, straight down. A shaft that for 100 years hadn't appeared in any hazard registry turned out to be too unstable even for the two best rescue teams in the state. As soon as the story reaches the national press, a public argument starts. People argue over whether it was justified to end the operation with a living man below. Nobody disputes the cause of the fall. Rob McGee of the United States Mine Rescue Association puts it bluntly. When you make a decision like that, in a sense, you're taking on the role of a higher power. He says he can't recall another case where a rescue was called off knowing the victim was still alive. And he adds the other half of the thought right away. A failed rescue operation doubles the tragedy. J. David McAteer, the former head of Federal Mine Safety Enforcement, answers differently. There are no universal rules for rescue in mines. Every situation is its own, and the decision always stays with the people standing there. Readers of the news aren't seeing it with their own eyes. There's a harsh view as well. Corey Schumann, who works with old mine workings privately, tells the press that he could have carried out the rescue and links the decision to what he considers a lack of experience. Not one of the people who actually worked at that shaft in those days backed that assessment. The hardest conversation runs inside the family. Devin's aunt, Sherry Schnurr, tells reporters that she herself wouldn't have quit. His sister, Misty Moser, publicly objects soon after. The interviews that ran do not reflect the family's position. The family's official statement settles it. The rescuers did everything they could. Rescuing Devin alive was not feasible with injuries like that and a shaft that unstable, and the family will be grateful to them forever. There's a separate line in it about how the hardest part was driving off that mountain without him. While the argument runs in the newspapers, completely different people are working at the site. The collar is fenced off with a barrier right after the operation ends, so that nobody else goes near it. The Bureau of Land Management announces that the shaft and several neighboring openings in the complex will be closed permanently, with the work planned for completion by Monday. This means a full seal. After it, there's no getting into the working at all. Devin's body remains at the bottom of the shaft. That decision is made openly, and the family agrees with it. And here, the story makes its last turn. The site appeared in the paperwork only after the tragedy, when the shaft was closed. Before that, it had stood open for 66 years, a few steps from a road that workers drove every single day. The closure took several days. Until the tragedy, the shaft had gone unrecorded. 15 years after that week in Jersey Valley, the picture across the state hasn't changed dramatically. The Abandoned Minelands program keeps working, closing a few hundred sites a year and finding almost as many new ones. Tens of thousands of openings in Nevada are still open, and some of them are just as absent from every list as the shaft at the Murphy complex was. The Westenskow story became one of the arguments in that conversation. It gets brought up because of how starkly clear it is, even though it isn't the hardest story out there. Between an ordinary drive out to look at an old mine and the point at which nothing could be changed, less than a second passed. 4.5 meters. That is how far a person has to swim underwater, through a flooded stone passage above the town of Provo, Utah, to reach the small chamber that was the whole reason for coming here. It is the length of a passenger car. 5 people went in on the night of August 18th, 2005. No tanks, no wetsuits, in sandals. 4 of them covered that stretch and reached the far chamber. None of the 4 returned. Why the same route in the other direction turned out to be impassable was worked out by rescuers and investigators. Cavers from around the state joined the review. Provo, Utah. The early hours of Thursday, August 18th, 2005. Above the eastern edge of town rises the slope of Y Mountain, named for the huge white letter Y laid out on its side by students from the local university. In Provo, it is visible from almost anywhere. It works as a landmark. Further down the slope lie a former golf course and the Seven Peaks Water Park. From there, at around 3 in the morning, a group of 5 heads up the mountain. The oldest is 28, the youngest 18. None of them told their families where they were going, or when they meant to be back. A night walk into the hills above town did not look like something worth mentioning. Their destination is an old mine working on the slope just south of the letter Y on Y Mountain. Sources describe the site as hidden by brush and trees, inconspicuous and marked in no guidebook. In the college town, people heard about it from friends. The group carries nothing that a trained person would take underground. No wetsuits, no air tanks, no helmets, no ropes. Some of them are in sandals and light summer clothes, for light, handheld flashlights, and not many of them. About a year before that night, Provo city workers were dealing with runoff in the foothills and came across an opening in the rock. By the accounts, it was originally about the size of a palm. By August of 2005, it had been widened to at least a meter. Who widened it, the records do not say. What is known is that a grown adult could get through freely. 2 piles of rock remained beside the entrance. Spoil heaps like that are left by people who take stone out from inside and dump it outdoors. Inside, visitors saw wooden timbering holding up the roof and rusted cables. Investigators concluded that the tunnel and the far chamber beyond the water belonged to an abandoned mine working. The site was not a natural cavity. Some locals called the place the water mine. By one account, the working followed an ore vein, but there is no confirmation, no company name, no year, no record of what was taken out here. Some of the coverage in 2006 kept describing the place, out of habit, as a natural cave. The record here is contradictory. The oldest in the group is Scott K. McDonald, 28, a Provo resident. He studied behavioral science at Utah Valley State College. His instructors remembered him as a strong student, and his last semester there was in the fall of 2004. J. Blake Donner, 24, from Springville, a third-year student of philosophy and English. Besides his studies, Donner wrote lyrics and sang in the hardcore band Parallax. That summer, the band had played a West Coast tour, and an East Coast tour was already booked for November. The coming months of his life were fully mapped out. Jennifer Lynn Galbraith, 21, from Pleasant Grove. She had signed up for the fall semester of 2005. Classes were due to start in a matter of weeks. Professor John Goschert, who taught both her and Donner, remembered the same thing about both of them: an enormous appetite for life. Ariel R. Singer, 18, from Orem. Born April 5, 1987, in Princeton, she graduated from Orem High School in 2004. The fifth is Joseph Ferguson, 26, who had come from Reno, Nevada. This was not an expedition and not a club. They were young people from neighboring towns in Utah Valley, where the drive from Provo to Orem or Springville takes 10 or 15 minutes. To understand what happened next, it helps to picture the geometry inside. Just past the entrance, there is a pool of water. The first thing anyone inside does is crawl through it. Beyond that runs a passage about 90 yards long, roughly 80 meters. A low crawlway taken bent double, or on hands and knees. About halfway along, the passage forks. One branch is dry, some 60 meters long. It bypasses the water entirely and leads nowhere in particular. The other ends at a shaft flooded to a depth of about a meter. Out of that shaft runs a flooded passage about 4.5 meters long. In caving, a stretch like that is called a sump, a section of passage completely filled with water from floor to ceiling with no air gap. There is only one way through a sump: to dive and swim its full length. There is no lifting your head, and there is no place to surface midway. There is rock overhead. Rescuers put the diameter of the flooded passage at about 75 centimeters. Other descriptions give less. The record here is contradictory. But even the upper figure means a tube a person enters shoulders tight. A rope had been strung through the sump, anchored at both ends, the only thing here that resembled equipment. A rope does not help anyone breathe and does not make a passage wider. It works as a guide. In murky water, without a mask, a person holds onto it and knows which way to move. Beyond the sump opens a chamber about 2.5 meters across, a small room half filled with water. Less than a meter of air remained above the surface, and the ceiling at its highest point was about 2 meters. This was where the route ended. The place already had a name, coined long before August of 2005. Young people in Provo called the tunnel Gollum's Cave, after Tolkien's character living under a mountain beside a black underground lake. The nickname fit exactly: wet rock, tight space, black water in the shaft. According to press reports on the night they set out, the group jokingly called the place something else: the Cave of Death. It was a joke, the kind said on the way into the dark. Within a day, the phrase would go into headlines as though it were the site's official name and travel across the country. It had nothing to do with the real name of the place. People came here constantly. The site was popular with students. They went up in groups, usually at night. 2 weeks before the tragedy, a party of 9 went through that same sump, and all 9 came back. One of them later told reporters how he lost his bearings in the flooded passage, stopped understanding which way was up and which way he was moving. The information passed by word of mouth from one group to the next, where the entrance was, where to turn, that there is a room beyond the shaft, and that 4.5 meters of water lie in front of it. What gets lost in stories like that is the difference between the first crossing and the second, between fresh strength and the state a person is in after an hour underground. At about 4:30 in the morning, the 5 squeeze one after another through the entrance opening. Outside, it is still dark. Sunrise is about an hour away. The group covers the first meters on hands and knees. The ceiling here is around 1.5 meters. Then the long passage begins. Water underfoot. Cold, damp air. A temperature inside that stays nearly the same all year and has nothing to do with August outside. Summer clothes and sandals stop being comfortable within the first minutes. There is not enough light for the whole group. Later, during the examination on site, a single flashlight and unlit candles will be found. One of the 5 was walking in someone else's light, and the candles were no use. Lighting them with wet hands in a wet passage is all but impossible. At the fork, the group takes the wet branch and comes out at the shaft. This is where the walk ends. 1 meter of depth, black water, and the mouth of the flooded passage. From the outside, the task looks short and simple, only 4.5 meters to the next room. But treating a sump as an ordinary short dive is a dangerous mistake. A small distance does not make a flooded passage safe. 4 of them go under the water and reach the far chamber. Scott McDonald, Blake Donner, Jennifer Galbraith, Ariel Singer. Joseph Ferguson tries to follow them through the sump. He does not manage it. He comes back into the shaft, stays on this side of the water, and waits with a flashlight. That decision is the only reason this story has a person able to describe how it looked from the inside. What comes next is the hardest part of the story for its only witness. He is alone, in a tight passage, beside black water. Between him and his 4 friends are meters of water and rock, and sound barely carries through them. Even if they called out from the far chamber, it would not reach the shaft. By his account, he waited about 45 minutes for them to come back. In all that time, nothing happened in the shaft. No splash, no movement of the water, no glow of another flashlight from below. There is no way to know what such silence means. They could simply have lingered in the room, resting before the swim back. 45 minutes is a very long time to sit still in a wet passage, where the shivering starts. Deciding to leave within that time is hard. Leaving means giving up the place where you last saw your friends. It is a long way out from the shaft, the whole long passage again, the pool by the entrance again, and the climb out onto the slope, alone, with 1 flashlight. Ferguson decides to go for help. He works his way back along the passage, gets out, and comes down the mountain to a telephone. At 6:25 in the morning, he calls the Provo police. By that point, about 2 hours have passed since the group went underground. Rescuers do not know whether the 4 are alive, and there is no way for them to find out yet. The one person who might have known could not get through those 4.5 meters. Thursday morning on the slope looks nothing like the night. Provo police and firefighters, police from neighboring Orem, and the Utah County Search and Rescue Team converge on the foothills. Several dozen people. The first problem is the lack of access. There is no road to the entrance. Everything needed up there has to be carried up the slope by hand. Pumps, hoses, tanks, wetsuits. Rescuers go inside. They have to do the same things the 5 did during the night. Crawl through the low entrance, move bent double, come out at the shaft. The difference is that they are in wetsuits and on breathing apparatus. And in a passage that tight, the air supply on their backs becomes an obstacle in itself. Rescuers work from one assumption. There may still be an air pocket beyond the sump. The room is half filled with water. There is a layer of air above the surface, which means that in theory people could wait in there. If they are alive and cut off, the first thing they need is air. So, oxygen is pumped into the far chamber, and water is pumped out of the passage. The work goes slowly. The line runs through that same narrow passage, and the pumping has to be done from an underground shaft that keeps refilling. They manage to bring the level down by about 60 centimeters. Only after that can divers work in the sump. Before, the flooded tube had no room for a person in gear. All this time, family and friends are standing at the entrance. They are not allowed inside, and there is almost nothing anyone can tell them. The operation timeline records that the first of the 4 was found at around 9:45 in the morning. The recovery of the other 3 was completed by about 10:45. There were no survivors. What matters is the rescue report's conclusion about where they were found. According to it, all 4 were in the flooded passage outside the far chamber, facing the exit. Lieutenant Dave Bennett stated the conclusion briefly. They had already been in the chamber and were on their way back. That changes the picture of the incident. What investigators had left to work out was what stopped the group inside that short underwater tube. In the rescuers' assessment, one person started the return. A likely blockage occurred at the narrow point and closed the route for the others. The layout of the passage shows that in a space like that, the 3 behind could not get around an obstruction or turn around. Later, the oxygen content in the far chamber would be measured at around 19%. Provo Police Lieutenant Scott Finch called things by their names. The environment there was extremely hazardous, and the group's preparation was inadequate. Not one of the 5 had any experience with underwater passages. The distance is the same, the passage is the same, the rope is in place. So why was the way back impassable for people who had come through it an hour earlier? For cave divers, there is no puzzle here. The sump going in and the sump coming out are 2 tasks of different difficulty. At the start, a diver is calm. He has just been breathing normal air, he is fresh, and he knows exactly where he is going. The way back begins under different conditions. To the same few meters are added fatigue, the cold that has drained the body over an hour, and accumulated stress. The room beyond the water is a cramped, half-flooded stone chamber with a low ceiling. The water in the narrow passage, after 4 people have gone through it, clouds up. Suspended silt kills the beam of a flashlight. What was visible on the way in turns into solid murk on the way back. In a sump, there is no turning around, and passing someone coming the other way is practically impossible. All a person can do is move forward. The rope helps only the one who holds it and stays calm. If it is lost in murky water, orientation is then limited to tactile contact with the rock. None of the 4 had a mask, an independent air supply, or any way to back off and wait. The authorities react at once. By Thursday afternoon, workers are climbing up to the entrance. The opening is packed with stone and filled with fresh concrete. From the recovery of the last of the 4 to the complete sealing of the entrance, only a few hours pass. And then comes something nobody planned. The concrete has not set yet, and the families and friends of the 4 scratch the 4 names and the date into it. Inscriptions made that same day are left in the wet mix. Flowers appear beside them. The state medical examiner gives the same cause for all 4: accidental drowning. There is one separate question that comes up first in stories like this, and decides how the public will regard the dead. Were they sober? Toxicology testing found neither alcohol nor drugs in anyone in the group. Detective Hyatt Bean summed the result up in a single line: no alcohol and no drugs in any of them. That autumn, Utah Valley State College establishes memorial scholarships in its students' names in the humanities department. A year on, what happened above Provo remains the state's most widely discussed underground tragedy, and noticeably changes the way Utah thinks about holes in the ground. The entrance to the working above Provo has been closed since 2005. The tunnel, the shaft, the sump, and the chamber beyond it are still there, inside the mountain. Outside there remain concrete, stone, and 4 names scratched into a wet mix.